What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr, and today I am bringing you a spicy update to Infernoids. Now as a disclaimer, this is basically an Infernoid pile. Now the reason I say that is it does utilise Snake Eyes and it does utilise Fiendsmiths, both of the most insanely powerful engines that we have. And the reason for that is both of those engines actually lead you into the Infernoid, so they both provide you with so much synergy and so much help that I wanted to make this deck as competitive as it possibly could be right now. Going forward in the future, this may change, but for now, this is the best version in my opinion. It gets a full-on 60 card overlook. It can involve the Azaminas if you want to as well, and what that will add is that'll add you the ability for an additional pop as well as an additional Omni Negate should you feel you need it and should you have access to it. At the end of the video, I'll also show you a demo side deck as well that I think you can consider when you're putting this deck together. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. Diving head first into the profile, we'll stay with the main core element of the deck, and that is of course the Infernoids. So you're going to be starting off with your main normal summon of the deck being your Infernoid Decatron, or your main kind of starter of the deck for the Infernoids themselves. A more ideal starter for the deck will of course be some of your Snake Eye cards, because they can lead you into the Decatron and it gives you more fires to get everything into rotation, as well as setting you up the ability for Decatron to be utilised more than once in a particular turn, which is what the Promethean Princess gives you access to. Now for those of you unfamiliar with how the Infernoids work, most of their monsters want you to be sending cards from deck to the graveyard, or specifically Inferno monsters from the deck to the graveyard. You then have lower level Infernoids, in my opinion, or what I kind of consider as the levels 1s to 4, which basically apart from Decatron need you to be only allowing them to special summon themselves from the hand by banishing an Inferno monster from the graveyard. You then get your higher and more stronger Infernoid monsters, which allow you to summon them from the grave or the hand by banishing Infernoids from the graveyard and sometimes the field. Now the benefit of these cards like that, or the downside, is that they can only summon themselves if your total levels on the board are 8 or less. As soon as you get level 9 accumulated on the board, they won't be able to summon themselves back, and that's where Link monsters come into play. That's where the Snake Eyes come into play as well. It just has so much crazy synergy. So for the lower level monsters, we do play the one Primus, the one Harmadink, the one Antra, and the one Protrulia. Now all of these have their own little inbuilt effects, and the way that Decatron works is Decatron lets you send any Infernoid from the deck to the graveyard, and then it copies its level and effect, which is when you're sending your big guys in the form of the Anonku and the Deviati, you ultimately end up giving a Decatron the ability to be a Monster Negate or a Spell and Trap Negate. Now with all of these, they all have different effects. These are the ones that can only be special summoned from the hand. They can't be normal summoned, and you have to banish a Inferno monster from the hand or grave, while the total levels and ranks of all effect monsters you control are 8 or lower. So with this one on the Primus, this one is once per turn you get to set, you can target a set card on the field, you shuffle it into the deck, and neither player can activate that card in response to this effect's activation. They all have the same effect as well, that once per opponent's turn you get a quick effect to tribute any monster you control, target a card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. The Harmadink gives you the ability that you get to target a monster on the field, destroy it. This card can't attack the turn that effect is activated. The Protrudia is a once per turn you get to target a spell or trap and destroy it, and again it can't attack the turn you use that effect. And then the Antra has the ability that you get to target a face-up card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. But these ones can attack, but obviously they're 0/0, so they're not really going to do much for you. Keep in mind, the Primus might actually come up slightly because we do play the Temple from the Snake Eyes, and that's another card that I really like with this deck, is it means that your stuff like Decatron and Primus aren't just weak little monsters anymore, they can actually pack a bit of a punch. Then for your bigger monsters, you've got the Piatti, we've got the Sijet, we've got the Sisymus. Now these are the only ones that I'm playing at 1s, the others I'm playing at 2, so I'll talk about these first. Now the Sijet is probably the most important one if you were attempting to resolve the Void Feast, because the idea is that you would send 2 Decatrons and your Sijet, which is a level 6, and this one basically lets you send a Void spell or trap from your hand or face out on the field to the graveyard to special summon up to 3 Inferno monsters from the deck whose total levels exactly equal 8, ignoring in some conditions. The reason Sijet is so important for that is Sijet is the only one that will allow you to summon out 2 Decatrons, and in doing so what that will set your board up with is a Decatron that would send an Anonku, which gives you a Monster Negate, a Decatron that would send a Deviati, which would give you a Spell and Trap Negate, or there might be the other way around. And let me just get these right. So the Deviati is, because they have an effect that when they're summoned, they destroy the spells, but then their other effect is monster. So Deviati is the monster effect, Anonku is the spell and trap effect. Apologies, I haven't played these as religiously as Carl. Carl is probably like the best player with the Infernoids on this one, so sometimes I do get them mixed up. But the idea is that Sijet being a level 6 lets you summon out 2 Decatrons off of the back of the Void Feast, which will then set you up with a Monster Negate and a Spell Negate, and then of course you've got Sijet, and then Sijet gives you the ability that once per turn as a quick effect, your opponent's You get to banish one monster from your opponent's extra deck, their choice, if this declares an attack. And then it has a quick effect to tribute one monster to then target a card your opponent's graveyard and banish it. The PRT, again, this is just another one that you want to play as many different Inferno names that you can get away with, which is why we are playing one of each of them, because as we're going through the play, you want to get enough into the graveyard so that when you do make, and this is where the Fiendsmiths come into play, the sequence can actually shuffle back as many Inferno monsters as you need in order to make you the Tierra, which does require a Nonku, Deviati, and then one or more Infernoid, and if you make it with 10 or more monsters, you get to use all of its effects, but it means that all the way up to the bottom, each player gets to return their entire hand, or sends the entire hand to the graveyard. I'll talk about more of the effects of Tierra once we get to the extra deck. So again, these ones can't be normal summoned or set, but they must be special summoned from the hand or graveyard by banishing 2 Inferno monsters. And then your PRT is when this card inflicts damage to your opponent, or battle damage specifically, by attacking an opponent's monster, you get to send a random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. The Sightsumus gives you, this is probably like the better of the ones I'm playing at 1-ofs, and it's probably one you could arguably play at 2. But this one gives you the ability that if this one, at the end of the battle phase, if it attacked an opponent's monster, you get to banish a card on the field. Now, more times than not, the reason this is only at 1 is because you're pretty much pushing to OTK. With the modernized state of the game right now and the modernized deck that you can play with the Snake Eyes and the Fiendsmiths, you should be able to push for an OTK. So that effect is less relevant, which is why it's one of the ones that is at 2 and not, at 1 and not at 2. For the ones that we are playing at 2, these are your Mac Daddy boss monsters. You've got 2 Atandel, 2 Deviati, and 2 Anunku. Now, I've pretty much touched on the Anunku and the Deviati. These are different because they must be summoned by banishing 3 Infernoids, not 2. But the reason that I've got all of these at 2 is the Atandel is the most aggressive of the ones that banish 2, because this one gives you the ability that when it destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you get to activate the effect and it gets to attack again in a row. The Deviati on the summon lets you destroy all spells and traps on the field except void cards, and then during either player's turn, when a monster effect is activated, you get to tribute one monster and negate the activation if you do banish it. So obviously the idea is that if you are using Decatron to copy the Deviati, Decatron will have all of those effects. The Anunku is basically a dark hole when it is summoned, so you destroy all other monsters on the field, and then during either player's turn, when a spell, trap card, or effect is activated, you get to tribute one monster to negate the activation if you do banish it. So the idea is you can see where these are your Mac Daddy boss monsters, and the reason you want to be playing 2s of is if you do open up one of them, you are going to be sending them very easily, and these are the ones you're going to want in the graveyard, not only to set you up with a monster negate or a spell negate, but also because you're going to need them in the graveyard if you want to go for your big boss monster in the form of Tierra. For the rest of the Inferno cards, we've got triple Void Imagination. I love the artwork on this one. Even the original artwork was pretty decent. Inferno monsters you control whose original levels are 2 or higher become level 1, which is really important because that's when all of your other Inferno monsters that basically say if your board is level 9 or higher accumulated, you can't summon them back, whereas Imagination puts them all to level 1, so it means you can actually just flood the board with loads of different Inferno monsters. The only downside is all battle damage they inflict to your opponent is halved, but then if you get them on the board and then get rid of the Void Imagination, the clause of half damage is no longer applied, and the clause of Infernoids that say they can't summon themselves wouldn't be applied because they're already on the board, so that's your little loophole on that one. You can send this card to the graveyard to fusion summon an Infernoid fusion monster from your extra deck, using monster from your hand or field as material. If your opponent controls a monster that was specialed from the extra deck and you do not, you can also use up to 6 monsters in your deck as fusion material. So that's where the Infernoid Evil comes into play, because this card's just cracked. This like sets you up so much. So that is if you don't have enough Infernoids, but then even if you do, you just go Void Imagination, you get a Tierra down just because your opponent has a monster from the extra deck. We've then got Triple Void Banishment. This is the card that lets you search out your Void cards. So you get to discard any card to add a Void spell or trap from the deck to the hand, except itself, or Null and Void. But also you cannot normal or special for the rest of the turn except Inferno monsters. You can only use each effect once per turn. And if an Inferno monster you control battles an opponent's monster after damage calculation, you get to send this card to the graveyard to banish those monsters. So obviously if you don't want that monster going to the graveyard, you can banish them. The idea is that this is the card you want to be using last, where at all possible, because then it means you shut off your Fiendsmiths, you shut off your Snake Eyes. But it's one of the ones that if you want to go direct route 1, you can activate this, search out your Imagination, and you've got your 6 copies. If you do it at the end of the turn, the idea is you're going to go for your Void Trap card in the form of the Void Feast, because then that's going to give you the ability to set up the negate. So you've got an option for going first and an option for going second. The last Void cards we are playing is the one Reignition. So you reveal an Inferno monster or a Void spell or trap in your hand, you discard your entire hand and then draw the same number of cards. that you discarded. If you control no monsters, or all monsters you control are fiend monsters, except this turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you get to banish it from the graveyard, target up to 11 of your banished Inferno monsters with different names and return them to the graveyard. You can only use this effect once per duel. So the recycle effect is once per duel. We're only playing one copy anyway, but the idea is that you get to, as soon as you get this to the graveyard, and you're probably better off having it milled than you are actually wanting to activate it. You still activate it, and it means it puts all of your Infernoids into the graveyard and refreshes, so it's kind of like a searchable card destruction in a sense. But then the idea is that you banish this from the graveyard, it puts all of the Infernos you've banished back into the graveyard, which is absolutely insane. And then the fact of the matter is, when you're putting all your Infernos back into the graveyard, you go, okay, cool, I can now start summoning the big guys back. So this card's mental, but one is more than enough. We do play the one Void Breach. Now, the card that I would probably swap this out for if I wanted to, it's the one card that I'm not currently main decking, is... well, it was to one side, but it's basically Monster Gate. Monster Gate is the card that I chose to take out. I do quite like Monster Gate, as there are times when you might get stuck with a big monster on the board, and you can activate Monster Gate to get rid of it, and then mill you cards until you hit a card that can be summoned. But the issue is, when we're playing Ash Blossom in the deck, and we're playing the Fiendsmiths, and you're playing the Snake Eyes, you've got more chance of hitting them, whereas back in the day with Monster Gate, the idea was you'd activate it, and then the only card you would be tributing more times than not would be a Decatron, and you'd hit another Decatron, meaning that you filled up your graveyard with loads of Infernoids. But Breach is Inferno monsters you control gain 100 attack for each of your banished Inferno monsters. And if you control no monsters, or all monsters you control are fiend, you get to activate one of these effects. Add one of your banished Infernoids from the banished Infernoid monster to your hand. Or you get to special an Inferno monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions. Now, obviously, straight away, as soon as you put Snake Eyes on the board, as soon as you put Witch on the board, you lock that effect out. So it's really important that these are one of the cards you want to be activating as your first cards if you do see them, and then just try and build your advantage off the back of that. Speaking of the Witch and the Wanted and the whole idea of the Snake Eyes, you're playing triple Witch, triple Bonfire, triple Wanted, the one OSS. Now this is obviously going to lead you into your Decatron if you want to, but it can also lead you into your Snake Eyes. So you've got your Ash, your Poplar, your Oak, and then of course you've got your Flamberge. So you can see that I'm not even going to really go over Snake Eyes. I would be amazed if they survive past January, if this full engine does. Like, the Snake Eyes might survive, Flamberge might not, the Diabell might get hit down, the Wanted might get hit down. But for now, while they can be, if you've already got Snake Eyes and you're like, I just want to play something a little bit more fun, this is the route to go for it. And the idea is that Bonfire gives you a way to extend if your opponent stops your first initial play. It gives you a way to search out something like a starter in the form of the Snake Eyes Ash. And the idea is you want to work your way to the original Sinful Spoils, as that is going to be your bridge from the whole Wanted engine into the Infernoid engine. Like I said, if this does get hit on the ban list and the Wanted goes down and the Diabell goes down, that's when you can probably start looking at putting in Deception, and you can start looking and going down the Azamina route to give you a little bit more protection, a little bit more consistency. The other cards that I still like to play is the one Snake Eyes Diabell, and I do still like playing the Divine Temple of the Snake Eyes, as it just gives you more and more resource. So that if your opponent is going to struggle to try and stop your Infernoids anyway, they should probably more times than not in this modernized game state know how to slow down, if not stop, the Fiendsmiths and the Snake Eyes, because that's just a common element. But it's when the Snake Eyes and the Fiendsmiths drag out all of those interactions, and then you just get to continue to follow up with the Infernoids, that your opponent's like, what the hell? Or you start with the Infernoids, you're making all those plays, and they're right, cool, I'll stop those, and then you go, right, sweet, I haven't even used my normal summon yet, I'm just going to go normal summon, or I haven't even gone to Fiendsmith Engine, you just have so much more gas, it's crazy. Fiendsmith Engine, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, pretty standard, 2 Engraver, 1 Lorry, 1 Lacrima, and 1 Tract. For the hand traps, I went with Ash Blossom, as this is, of course, is a fire style deck. We've then got triple Imperm and triple Impulse. You've got to be very, very careful with Impulse in this deck, because if you activate it, it shuts off your entire Fiendsmith line. But the idea is going first, you burn through your Fiendsmiths, you set your Impulses, great success. If you don't do that, you need to be very smart and not use the Impulses and actually save them as an infinite impermanence to be set. You can side these out, and the card that I would consider probably siding them out for would be something like a Forbidden Droplet. And the benefit of something like Forbidden Droplet is it lets you put some of your Infernoids that you may not want in your hand into the graveyard. So it really is up to you. You can swap the Impulses out for the Droplets. I just wanted to show you that this is an option for you, and it's probably one of your more ideal hand traps for the deck. You just need to be very careful. If you activate it, you need to remember that your entire Fiendsmith engine is going to be shut off. The last cards that we're playing is the one Azaroon. The Azaroon again could be taken out for something like a Monster Gate, but the idea is I wanted to play cards in a 60 card version that I could get easier access to coming from the extra deck, and that's where the Rabbit comes into play. So once I'm making all my boards, most of my end board will end up on something like an Infernoid Flood, or cards that basically say I need to tribute my monsters in order to do an additional effect to my opponent. So the way that I look to that is, if my board can get me a rabbit, which is just free tribute fodder, and then also give me an Azaroon, which can become tribute fodder, but can also just become a direct way of stopping one of my opponent's cards, it just gives me more and more interactions for them. The last cards we're playing are normal spell cards that are at 1 for a reason, which is 1/1 for 1, get you into your Snake Eyes engine, get you into your Decatron. That grass looks greener, 60 card deck, mill 20. If you hit the Fiendsmith engine, off you go. If you hit cards that are going to fuel or give you draw power with Wanted or fuel the Snake Eyes Flamberge plays, great success. If you hit your Infernoids, even better, bigger success. Reasoning basically acts like a Foolish Burial. You can play Foolish Burial, but I like the idea of milling a little bit more, because this can become a Foolish Burial or can become an extender, so it can come 2 of 1 cards. And then the 1 instant fusion, which will get you directly into your Infernoid Evil. And once we get to Infernoid Evil, I'll talk about it as the next card, it's just incredibly broken. It just sets up so much for the deck, which is why you want to try and use the Fiendsmith engine to help you get there, but you also want to be able to try and use as many cards in the main deck to help you get there as well, because it just increases your consistency, increases your power, it gives you more ways of just being able to disrupt your opponent from one very powerful card. So, speaking of which, Infernoid Evil. We're going to be playing this at 2. So this requires just 2 Inferno monsters, but you do technically need 3 Inferno monsters in rotation to get the most from it. So with this Fusion Zone, you get to banish an Inferno monster from your graveyard to send an Inferno monster with a different name from the deck to the graveyard equal to that banished monster's level. So if you have already sent a Decatron, if you have already sent an Anonku, because your first card that you started off with was like a Decatron, that would then set you up the ability to then banish that big guy and then put all of your Inferno cards into the graveyard. Don't worry about it, because if you get to this off of the back of Imagination, or you get this off of the back of Instant Fusion, you're just going to go into sequence and put all of those Infernoids back into the deck, or you're going to be utilizing them as banish fodder to give you all of the Infernos to the board to help you keep going and work your way into the generic links of stuff like the Promethean Princess and everything else in between. If that wasn't enough, if this card is just sent to the graveyard or banished by any means, so banished off of the back of an Infernoid, or just sent to the graveyard because you linked it off, you get to add a Void spell or trap from the deck to the hand. You can only use each effect once per turn. The other Infernoid fusion monster that we are playing is the one Infernoid Tierra. This is your Mac Daddy boss monster. So incredibly easy to summon nowadays in comparison to the old days. So it requires specifically Anonku, Deviati, and then 1 or more Infernoid. The more Infernoid you use to make this, the better it will be. So when it is Fusion Zoned, you get to apply these effects in sequence dependent on the number of fusion materials with different names used for this card summon. 3 or more, each player sends 3 cards from their extra deck to the graveyard. 5 or more, each player sends a top 3 cards of their deck to the graveyard. 8 or more, each player returns up to 3 of their banished cards to the graveyard. And then 10 or more, each player sends their entire hand to the graveyard. So you can basically rip away your opponent's entire hand. Yes, it will rip yours away, but you're playing cards that come back from the graveyard. So you can either, well, it wouldn't even be either. If you get to use this with 10 Infernal monsters with different names, you're going to be ripping their hand apart. You're going to be returning 3 of your banished cards to the graveyard. You're going to be sending the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard, and you're going to be sending 3 cards from their extra decks to the graveyard. So you could be sending stuff like Elder Entity Unts, you could be sending stuff like Ferrigeets, you could be sending stuff like Garuras. You just get ways of being able to get maximum advantage off the back of Tierra. And then moving into the other fusion monsters that we are playing. So at the moment I'm playing the one Aerial Eater. Now the reason for this, and this is one of the flex spots that I'm highly considering to main deck stuff like the Garura and main deck stuff that will also help with a side deck choice of Ultimate Slayer. But the idea is that if you go down your Fiendsmith route, your Fiendsmith route could now just spin you back 2 Fiend monsters, very easily done, to give you a bit more psychability, to get you into your Aerial Eater, which will then allow you to send a Decatron from deck to grave. And then what you do is you use your sequence plus your Aerial Eater to go into Promethean Princess. Princess will bring back the Decatron. Decatron can then send. And the idea is that by the point you've made that particular play, you're setting up Fiend monsters in the graveyard. You're able to leave your Engraver in the graveyard as well, so that can come back, and you could even start looking at stuff like playing the Triple D Higher Wave King Caesar. It is up to you. It is one of the flex spots, but I have kind of seen it in testing more times than not that it does come up quite a few times to help get me that bridge from the Fiendsmith engine if I don't open up everything I need to. The last one, of course, is Elder Entity Unts. This can be sent off Tierra. It can, of course, be sent off of the Ultimate Slayer. And that's something that I want to fine-tune with this deck if I am going to use Ultimate Slayer, is I want to make sure and try and main deck more of the targets for the Ultimate Slayer, because then they can also be used off the back of Tierra. So whether you're going to be using Agitator to negate, you can use Malong to bounce, you can use Ferrigeet to draw and put a card back, which can be quite helpful, Garura to give you an out-and-out draw. You've got the Link 4, where is it? the Link 4 Evil Twin, which if you were to side in the big Evil Twin in a 60 card deck, you're absolutely fine to do so. This can then give you a double removal. So it's just kind of tailoring it to your particular playstyle, what you have access to. And I feel that going forward, Ultimate Slayer is going to be such a great card for the format when you're looking at Malices being Link targets, and then you're looking at the Ryziels being XYZ targets as well. Moving into the Link monsters. So for the Link monsters, of course, we'll just go over the Fiendsmith element of it. So you've got your one Requiem, the one Sequence, and of course the one Moon Goddess. The idea is the best kind of thing for this entire engine is the Sequence. The fact that the Sequence lets you get into your Infernoid Evil or your Tierra is just absolutely insane, which is why the Fiendsmith engine is so good for this particular deck. On top of that as well, it can bridge you into Princess, and then Princess will ultimately end up bridging you into Flood, because the idea is that Princess will bring back something like a Decatron. The Decatron would then send from deck to grave. You'd then be able to use the Decatron as the Infernoid monster, because it just requires 2 or more monsters, including Inferno monster. So Link 3 plus Decatron gets you into Flood. And then Flood has the ability that when your opponent would special summon a monster or monsters, you get to tribute one monster and negate the summon, and if you do, banish that monster. And then if a card or cards is banished from the graveyard, except during damage state, you get to banish one card on the field. And then if this Link summon card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you get to special summon an Inferno monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can only use each effect once per turn, but obviously the idea is it's a Mac Daddy boss monster from the extra deck. It completely clears your levels as well, because obviously the idea is that when you're making this, you're going to be clearing off all the levels so that all the Infernoids in the graveyard can just start coming back, and that's when you're going to get the most advantage from it. We've then got the one Heater, the Fire Charmer, backed up by pretty much your staple cards in the form of the SP Little Knight, IP Masquerena, the Silhouette Rabbit, and of course the Relinquish Anima. Now, the Silhouette Rabbit is another one of them cards that I would highly consider maybe subbing out for a Ultimate Slayer target, for the pure fact that when I'm putting Ultimate Slayers in, I'm not relying on going first to set me up the Azaroon play, which means that straight away the Azaroon comes out of the main deck, and Ultimate Slayer goes into the main deck, and then the Rabbit comes out of the extra deck, and then a target will go into the main deck. I've got enough Link monsters to semi-cover Links, so you'd probably be looking at something like Garura to give you a bit more of a draw factor, or you'd be going down the route of the Agitator, depending on the format you're going into. Like, if you're turning up to a locals and everyone splashed their cash on Ryziels and Malices, then you're going to want to make sure you've got Link and XYZ targets in your extra deck. So that's it for the entire deck and the extra deck. I did promise you that I would show you a demo side deck, so I'm going to show you that now. So for the demo side deck, I'm going with my choice of triple Forbidden Droplet. I am also playing double Triple Tactics Thrust, so you could consider something like a Dark Rule No More if you wanted to. My targets that I can search off the back of Thrust will be Ultimate Slayer. This is something that I may consider. I just feel that going forward in the upcoming format, Slayer is going to be such a good card. I think the card was always really decent, but if you have the space in the extra deck to kind of make it a little bit more consistent, you might as well go for it. And the fact of the matter is the deck can naturally send stuff from the extra deck to the graveyard if you get to Tierra. So what you're doing with Ultimate Slayer is you're giving you more consistency to get to those particular cards, so that your opponent can't stop the Tierra on the build-up, and you can pretty much do that and then do Tierra and get double value from it. More targets over the back of the Triple Tactics for us to get will be Duster, Lightning Storm, Evenly, and D-Barrier. And the last 3 cards, again, that can be subbed out for Ultimate Slayer targets is something like a Lava Golem, a Denko Sekar. It really is up to you. Now, yes, you do still want to use your normal summon, but when you have cards like Popular that can summon themselves for free, within reason, you've got OSS that can get you into that Snake Eyes element, and can get you into Decatron. You've got ways of being able to use Promethean Princess to bring stuff back. You can, if the environment is calling for it, sacrifice it and put Lava Golem in. I'm not saying it's something you definitely want to do, but it's a card that a lot of people will forget about, and it's one of them cards that is so massively impactful that it catches your opponent off guard. And the best thing I love about a Lava Golem is if I open up 2, I can go Lava Golem my opponent's first 2 monsters, and then Lava Golem the first Lava Golem I gave them, and the other monster, and then all I need to worry about is a single Lava Golem on their board. So really is up to you. It gives you a bit of flexibility to kind of play around with it. But yeah, I thought I'd show you this, give you a couple of ideas. Apologies that my voice has started to go. I have been a little bit little bit under the weather recently. But it seems that my constant talking is now starting to drain. Anyway, I hope this gives you a couple of ideas on your own build for it. I kind of wanted to bring Infernoids back into the light. The deck is more fun. It's not going to be like toppling the metas or anything else like that. But the fact of the matter is the deck has its own inbuilt DD Crow system. It has its own inbuilt like insane access to boss monsters, but it does fall back on the same issue that most high level style decks will have, and most decks that say cannot be normal summoned or set, it can be a little bit bricky, which is why you want to utilize stuff like the Wanted engine and of course the Fiendsmith engine to help you unbrick that, and they are both incredibly powerful in their own right. And that's why if you really wanted to, adding into the Asminas will also give you another route of an outcome, but it just kind of gives you a bit more to play with. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, as absolutely always, stay safe and, of course, happy dueling.